CTMD and Yiddish New York are also the sponsors of this event, and which is in a launch party in honor of this great new website, YiddishFolksong.com. It's meant to be a new home on the internet for scholarship and pedagogical discussions about the Yiddish folk song tradition. And it works in parallel with, there's been some other great websites that are on the internet. Thanks to Lauren Sklamberg and Eleanor Bazinski of YIVO. We have the great Ruth Rubin archive on YIVO's website. Itzik Gottesman is the editor of the wonderful Yiddish Song of the Week website, which is every week puts out a wonderful Yiddish song and notes about it. So check those out on the internet as well. And they're on the resources page of this new website, YiddishFolksong.com. Actually, Clara, do you want to just put YiddishFolksong.com in the chat so everybody can click on it? So we want to give thanks. There's been a couple funders of this project, the David M. Milch Foundation and the Atran Foundation. So thanks so much to those groups for their support. The new website was developed by a project team led by our dear friend, esteemed ethnomusicologist Mark Slobin. And Mark will really present the team and the website. I also, though, want to thank Clara Byam and Sophie Edelman for their hard work with the technical building of the website. And I guess without further ado, we're going to have a special way of starting this program. I want to hand it over to another dear friend, an NEA National Heritage Fellow, who I'm sure most of you know also, Michael Alpert, coming in from Crail, Scotland.
Yeah, as Emily just said, my sweetheart, partner, and colleague right next to me, she said, which National Heritage Fellow? Because there's at least one more here. But yeah, so we'll start with a song from Bronya Sakina that's appropriate to the occasion, making a little l'chaim here with Rivsky Balzam for our friends from Latvia and other parts of the former, or the continued former. Lomer sein gesinnt, in Lomer sein gesinnt, alle unsere Freund. In solchen gehen sie grind, in solchen gehen sie grind, die Adach ist von unsere Fand. Der Mechiten Mordche, so Mark Slobin, soll der leben, mit seiner Spuche, in Naches und in Frieden. Hurra, hurra, ra, 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 ay, ay, da, ra, ram, ta, ra, 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 ram. Hoi Lomer sein gesinnt, in Lomer sein gesinnt, alle unsere Freund. In solchen gehen sie grind, in solchen gehen sie grind, die Adach ist von unserer Freund. Meine alle Kollegen sollen der Leben mit seinem Spuches in Naches und im Frieden. Hurra, hurra, ra, 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 ta, ra, 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 ra. Hoi Lomer sein gesinnt, in Lomer sein gesinnt, alle unsere Freund, die in solchen gehen sie grind, in solchen gehen sie grind, die Adach ist von unserer Fand. Die alle Singer sollen der Leben mit seinem Spruch, es in Naches und in Frieden. Hurra, hurra, ra, 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 ta, ra, 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 ta, ra, 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 Hoi Lomer sein gesinnt, in Lomer sein gesinnt, hoi alle unsere Freund, in solchen gehen sie grind, in solchen gehen sie grind, die Adach ist von unserer Fand. Die alle Gäste sollen der Leben mit alles ihrem Spruches in Naches und in Frieden. Hurra! Alle zusammen. Ta-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra-ra-ram-dam. L'chaim Levrucha. Baruch
Uh,
Hi.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thank you for that extraordinary introduction to this splendid event, which has been a long time brewing. I need to immediately thank Pete Ruzewski for being the host for this. Without a host, you have no website. It has to be somewhere you can trust who is interested in it, and that's not so easy, actually. So absolutely delighted to continue that connection for all of us with that CTMD. This started a couple years ago, really about 2 years ago, I think, at Yiddish New York. And when I was talking to Josh, and Josh said he'd been talking to Zev, and we started talking about the Yiddish folk song because we were so surprised that so many really young people, some of whom are with us right here today, are showing a real interest, not just in Yiddish music and klezmer, but in dafke in the Yiddish song, and that they had their own creative aspirations to work in this area. It took me by surprise, and even my colleagues who are, the teachers and leaders in this field. So I said, we should do something about this because the problem with the Yiddish folk song, which now has a lot of sources you can listen to, is there's no literature. There is no technical literature on the Yiddish folk song. There is no analytical writing about this. So people sing, but they don't have enough in-depth kind of ways of thinking about the Yiddish folk song. This is the only major body of European folk song that has no literature. All of my colleagues and many of you who've been to Budapest and Bucharest and all these places and where there are thousands of linear feet of transcriptions and discussions and book after book after book of analysis, and they don't know about the Yiddish folk song, and they sit cozily in their little areas. And I should say my own field, ethnomusicology, really doesn't have a clue. I wrote one article in the journal there about Vierogovsky. So partly, maybe because I've been watching the Queen's Gambit, I think of this as kind of a gambit we're doing right here, where our little pawn, the Yiddish folk song, we want to advance across the board until it becomes a queen, okay? Until it becomes a malka within the world of folk song. This is my subtext for gathering these wonderful old friends. I've known all of these people like 45 years, and it's kind of quite extraordinary to the meetings that we had to sit around the table in my place. And I thought, well, we'll talk a little, and then we talked 4 hours. And then we met a few weeks and we talked for 3 or 4 hours. And then we met, and every time it was 3 hours or 4 hours. And we're talking like about one song. How do we understand one lyrical Yiddish folk song? So I'm going to introduce the people one by one who have been doing this. The point, though, let me just end with the point of this website is to put down a marker, as I say, to be a kind of gambit. And so to move the thing forward, we will, consider adding people's contributions over time. We'll think about people who really have this kind of approach of analysis and thoughtful insight into the Yiddish folk song, and hope to kind of expand the knowledge base that way. There are boxes for each of the essays for comments, so it'd be great to get some feedback when you read this. And we hope it continues. We also put in a bunch of source materials, some of which are not easily available, others which are available but haven't been assembled in one place. And there's one extraordinary new piece. It's an article written in the 1920s by Mikhail Gniasin about analyzing Yiddish music, which we have courtesy of Vitaly Zemtsovsky, our wonderful colleague who has worked on Vierogovsky and other things. So that's a brand new thing translated into English for the first time. So that's the point of this thing. That's what we're thinking about, and we're going to hand it over to the public from this point on. So let me start in kind of order, and I think I'll just leave it to the individual contributors to talk about what they were aiming at and what their article does. But I will say there are these basic sections, 3 basic sections. One is the structure of the technical structure of the song, and one is profiles of singers, and then there's one which is the embodied aesthetic, the lived performance of the song. And there are videos there as well that I think the contributors will speak to in their own sections as well in two of those cases. So that's the basic format. So we're going to start with Zev Feldman, who did the opening essay, because we started with this problem: what do we mean by the Yiddish folk song? And that's a very, very vexed question. So Zev was the first person to sit down and sort that out and say, this is what we think we're talking about here. So I'll leave Zev to introduce that.
Well, hello. First of all, can you all hear me?
A little hard, little hard.
I should be louder?
Yeah.
Louder? Yeah. Better? Better? It's good. Okay. Okay. Now, fortunately, you see my long hair hidden by these cumbersome earphones. And I want to thank Mark for getting this wonderful project underway. And of course, Mark knows me since I was a grad student working as a Central Asianist. We both had Afghanistan and Uzbekistan in common. And of course, I welcome the chance to, to rethink some of these issues, because I work in Ashkenaz music. As you all know, my genre is not this, but rather the instrumental music and Jewish dance. But as Mark said, there's really almost no literature about Yiddish song. And in the little essay that I wrote, I have several pages on historical demographic background of the Jews that we called Ashkenaz Jews in Eastern Europe. And then some attempts at making definitions of the different repertoires of Yiddish song. And from the outset, as those of you who will read or have already read my essay, we can't make very clear connections between these repertoires and anything that's a non-Jewish European folk music or folk singing. Some things are analogous. Lyric songs, yes. Lullabies, yes. Some balladry, yes. But whole repertoires that are basic to European folklore are absent. And as Berezovsky mentions, the Jews didn't have wedding songs in Yiddish. And what I want to say also is that in dealing with my friends here who are Michael and Josh and Ethel, who are practitioners, who are songwriters, who are singers, we have something alive that's still with us and hopefully will have a future. But I'm a historical ethnomusicologist. I like to understand how things developed over time. And in fact, I think I've never seen any genres of any musics I've studied where there's such radical change in every generation. Where you have going back just 3 generations, or not 3, no, so I'm not that old. Say going back to, let's say, my great-grandfather's time, okay? You would have had a situation where most Yiddish singing would not have been done in public. It had no status within Jewish culture. Everything that was done in public had to be male. And this always was ambiguous between male, female. I actually come from a kind of immigrant subculture in which men didn't sing Yiddish songs and hardly ever listened to Yiddish songs. As I mentioned in my introduction, we davened in shul and we danced at weddings. Those were the genres that I was aware of. And in fact, when you look back historically, you see this as the most contentious area of East European Jewish expressive culture was the song in the vernacular. And even when we talk about Yiddish song, now we talk about Yiddish. Berezovsky and Prilutsky, for example, studied songs which had several languages. Jews often sang songs which had Yiddish, it had Hebrew, it had Polish, it had Ukrainian, because to some extent people were aware of those languages. Now, in the American immigration, most of those songs disappeared. So we think of the Yiddish song as the Yiddish song, not the Yiddish song with Polish or Yiddish song with this and with that, maybe some Hebrew, right? Whereas when you look at Yiddish singers in Russia, in Moldova, today, in Ukraine, they're often aware of these mixed repertoires, some are Jews. It's very much part of the Jewish, creativity. And then, of course, there's this issue of religious song, which hardly we have representatives anymore, religious singing in Yiddish, which has an old tradition, and then this gray area between religious song and various kinds of zemiras and zemero and nigun, which sometimes had text, and of course zemiras had text. How do they relate to Yiddish song? Do they not relate to Yiddish song? In Russian, and Beregovsky makes this distinction between a piece, a song, and a napiev. A napiev is something that's vocal, but it's not a song. And so in his collection of nigunim, Hasidic nigunim, he calls them napiev, not piece. And in English, we don't really have that vocabulary. So even when we talk about this folk song, often, as I write, often using a foreign terminology that's not appropriate. And then the issue of composed songs. Jews were much more literate than a peasantry. People were writing songs. So this issue of composed song is nothing new in Yiddish. There's always been this dialogue, interplay between a purely oral transmission and then written songs of various kinds, including the Yiddish language. And then, of course, from the first half of the 19th century, you start getting maskilik song. You get songs that are trying to, they have a social political agenda, right? Which are, and in fact, for most Jews in America, many of the most popular Yiddish so-called folk songs are maskilik songs. They're songs that are meant to poke fun at traditional life. They're meant to try to affect change in traditional thinking. They actually resonate a great deal with the children of immigrants and the grandchildren of immigrants. And in many cases, these were more a male repertoire than a female repertoire. So you have very big differences between the Yiddish repertoires, which are not theatrical, but actually folkloric in some way, even if many of them were composed. So it's Mark suggests, it's a very complex issue, and we don't have enough literature to guide people into what it is, or what it was, or what it was in each generation. So that's what I have to say. And my little essay is trying to put up a few flags, to see where we've been and where we're going with this. But that's, of course, no substitute for the sheer enjoyment of the performance and the poetry of the songs. But as someone who's interested in the culture of East European Jews, which I am, this is an important part of the story that hasn't been told properly. So there I am, and thank you, Mark, for getting us all together.
Well, thank you, Zev. That's enormously helpful to have that kind of an opening for this, and that, of course, can be refined and extended, and could be a much longer, kind of work eventually. We're going to go next to Josh Waletzky, who took this occasion to write a magnum opus of an article that he's been wanting to do for many, many years, replete with many, many diagrams and charts. And so well, maybe Josh can give us a little, some threads in the labyrinth of his thinking and what he was aiming at in his work.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I so full of thoughts and gratitude at the moment that this project has finally come to this stage of fruition. As Mark mentioned, I started talking a couple of years ago, it was maybe about 2014 or 15, with a number of colleagues. I remember Josh Horowitz among them. And then I started having, as Mark said, more extended conversations with Zev and then with Mark. And the bee in my bonnet was rhythmic structure of the Yiddish song. In the past year, I discovered that, is Breindl, are you still here? I don't have the view. That many years ago, about 45 years ago, I actually gave a presentation on this very topic, rhythm of the Yiddish folk song, in Breindl's YIVO seminar of the Yiddish Folk Song Project. And I I started from the same foundation, which is a book called Rhythm in Music, or the Rhythmic Structure of Music, um, that I had picked up at a music bookstore at Juilliard Preparatory Division, where I was studying at the time. Anyway, all these many years later, it's been a tremendous opportunity for me to follow and really work out some of these thoughts about the rhythmic structure of the Yiddish folk song, and in particular, the unaccompanied folk song. This is very important because what I believe is that the unaccompanied folk song is the way that the songs have lived, and we're talking now about the sort of came to the shape in which I received them, which is mid 20th century, and the songs were not transmitted by recordings. There was no such thing. And I think this is a very, very essential part of understanding a lot about the songs and the way that they related to the rhythms of ordinary conversational Yiddish, and various styles of prayer, of learning, of other kinds of oral activities of everyday life. So what I have tried to do in this magnum opus is to take one very tiny corner of the field, a single song, von Größter Sad, which is one of the classics, I would say, first brought to the attention of the world by Ruth Rubin in her magnificent collection of songs, The Old Country. And that's in fact how I heard it and learned it myself. But I guess I want to say that learning a song in that way from hearing a recording is, in my own experience, very similar to the way that I learned many songs from hearing them in live performance, because very often I would hear a song once or maybe twice by a singer, and that's how I learned it. And I think this is true. This is true for this is a way that many of these songs were learned and then passed along. Anyway, in the article, I take the exact polar opposite perspective from Zev, and that's why I'm so pleased that Zev's article appears on the same site as mine, because between the two, yeah, it's kind of like if you read Zev's article, then my article is the dark side of the moon, and vice versa. They come at it from completely. So my approach is completely ahistorical. I have no interest in my article in the history. Each song is completely opaque. We don't see how it came to be or anything about it. And I do that because that's been my experience of a song. When I heard a song growing up, I didn't know where it came from, who sang it before, what the intention or the irony or the lack of irony or anything else. It was purely a musical object, which what I knew was that the singer was taking pleasure in the aesthetic of the song. That's the thing that bound me to the song. And that's what I learned about the song, was that here's something that's pleasurable to sing and to hear. So I've tried to construct my article from that basis. And what is it about in this case, the rhythmic structure of the song that creates pleasure in the listener and the singer? and I would just add one thing to that, which is, well, two things. One is that the terminology, when we get into a very technical description of rhythm, is vexed in the extreme. The same term will be used in a different sense by different writers. And so I urge you, if you're going to try to tackle this article, not to be put off by the technological stuff. I've tried to put in a lot of examples to help ground it, but also to understand that if I use the word meter or stress or something like, a word like that, a technical musical term, I hope I define it clearly, because other writers will use it in the opposite way or in a different sense. So there's no standardization among people writing about rhythm, even though rhythm is such an essential part of music. And the second thing that I want to say is that in writing my article, it was not until the very end of the article that I actually discovered the most intriguing pattern in the rhythmic structure of this song, Von Kreuz Assad. And I say that only as a little bit of a lure to keep you reading through all the very opaque detail and intricate discussion, because I think it was rewarding for me to get to the end and say, oh my God, that's how that works. It truly is a magnificent song that we started with, Von Kreuz Assad. And one of the great things about having this on the web is that you have the clip that you can play at any point as you're reading the article. We have the audio clip, which is not the case if you're reading this in a journal. So with that, and my great thanks to all the colleagues and all of my teachers.
I'll circle back a little bit and talk about the component. When we talk about the teaching and aesthetic component, which is also in your part of what you did in the website, or maybe we'll come back and mention that later. But let me go on now to this section. So we had the introduction of Zeb, we have Josh and this highly analytical technical article on one aspect of the folk song, of the unaccompanied Yiddish folk song, which I didn't say, I guess, as clearly as I might have before, is the focus of what we're doing in this piece. Then we have a section of profiles. So Itzik Gottesman and Michael Alpert have been working on specific singers so that we get a sense of the actual people and pay tribute to, the actual people. And I hate the old names for this. People used to be called carriers, which I really think it sounds like you're carrying a virus, or I love tradition bearer, as if it's this great burden on your back, that you're carrying through history. I mean, forget that stuff. We're talking about the living embodiments of an extraordinarily rich and powerful tradition. So Itzik, do you want to talk a little about that?
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Everyone can hear me? Yes.
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of the essays on this project are filling in a lot of blanks in scholarship on the Yiddish folk song. And I undertook to write about one singer and how song fits into her life, which no one has really written about to any great extent. Only Beregovsky mentions something about the singer, asks some questions of the singer. But other than that, until really Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett's project in the early 70s called the Yiddish Folk Song in Social Context, something like that, which was an extensive project interviewing singers. If you were at Yiddish New York last year, you heard Toby Dopkin talk about her experience. And I think one of the main singers that Professor Kirschenblatt interviewed was my grandmother, Lifsha Schechter-Widmann. So every singer is unique in biographically speaking, but they also have many things in common. And so I undertook to listen to the tapes. First of all, I was very fortunate in that we had the recordings of that project, but Lifsha herself wrote a book of memoirs where song and singing plays a part. In addition, I had my mother, her daughter, who remembered and filled in many of the blanks, and her comments, of this singing. So I had several sources to put this together. And so when I say that many folk singers shared things, I mean, I think that they were really talented singers, were identified in the shtetl from an early age. I think that's true of Maria Nierenberg, another singer that came out on, and certainly with Lifsha. According to Lifsha, when she was very young, 6 or 7, the older singers could already tell that she had a voice and she remembered words. And as she got older, it seemed that they sang her songs basically so that she would learn them and sing them back to them. So I read the essay for every detail, but I would just, a couple of highlights that I remember is Lifsha said that on Saturday afternoon on the Shabbos, the young unmarried women would take a walk into the woods. And that's where they would sing these love songs, lyrical love songs about who their husbands will be and how great life will be. But at night, at the end of the Sabbath, she hung out with the older women, not the maidlach, but the Weiber, who would be working, they would be in the kitchen while the men sang nigunim or political songs in the living room. They would be in the kitchen plucking feathers together, doing some work together, and singing very sad songs. According to Lifsha, they knew what life was already about, and so they sang very sad songs, as opposed to the maidlach who were singing very optimistic songs. Another unique aspect of Lifsha is that she came to America when she was 15, 16, and went back to Eastern Europe, and she didn't finally immigrate until 1950, 1951. So her American period is very interesting because she picked up all of these Yiddish theater songs, penny, as they're called now, the penny songs. She went out to they gave her a nickel to buy some seltzer, and she came back instead with these song sheets, right? Because she loved the song that the person was singing on a soapbox. And this is all in the Lower East Side. So she brought that repertoire back to Eastern Europe. And I say in the essay that, when I worked at YIVO as an archivist for 5 years, and then when I looked at the song collections and what the YIVO collectors collected, I often found these American theater songs, which were, how did they even learn these songs? Well, partially there were theater troupes from America, but there were also people like Lifsha who brought back this American Yiddish repertory back. So every singer is unique. And I think a lot can be done now thanks to that project, the Ruth Rubin project online. The Stonehill collection is being put online. So we have 3 amazing collections, which earlier generations did not have to look at. And we have to find, biographical materials. Sometimes it comes in little dribbles. So yeah, I don't want to repeat everything that's in the essay. I wanted to say a couple of things I'm planning for the website. This might come as a surprise to everybody else, but this is through my work at Yiddish Song of the Week, where people send me, they send me one line, can you find the song? And I want to make a step-by-step guide how to find the songs. Right. Not just listing resources, but actually step-by-step. Of course, step 1 is the most difficult one, learn Yiddish. But after that, it becomes easier. And I also hope to publish, I'm speaking at the Association for Jewish Studies, a conference in a couple of weeks on sort of 10 years of the blog Yiddish Song of the Week and what we learned, what I've learned from all these people writing in about their songs and people having these hidden recordings in their attic of their grandmothers singing. and they sing 10 verses. I mean, it's incredible how important the songs were to them. So those are the couple of things I'm planning, hopefully for the website, and Mazel Tov on the new website. That's all for now.
That's great. I mean, the idea that we'll have more of these kinds of sources and practical guides is really important. I just mentioned, since you mentioned Toby Bloom-Dopkin and her work with Mr. Milstein, she graciously allowed us to put on the website her 75-page essay she did for Barbara Kirchenwag-Imblett's class on her work with Milstein. And so this is an extraordinary profile that also belongs in this profile selection, thanks to Toby. And also remember that the whole project, that gigantic project that Barbara ran is slowly getting digitized as well, and will be a massive contribution to our knowledge because of how extraordinary the organization was and how deep and searching the questionnaires were. Okay, I'm going to give it back to Michael Alpert to talk about the profile that he's working on for this.
Yes, hi everyone. One of the thoughts I just had with what you just said, Mark, is that, or what everyone has said so far, is that back at the sort of Yiddish Olduvai Gorge, or the Klezmer Olduvai Gorge, at least back in the mid to late 70s. And for a long time after that, I think a lot of us had the impression that there was very little documentation of East European Jewish traditional music in general, especially, I mean, both sound documentation and notated collections. And in fact, I mean, I'm more and more struck by the fact that we actually have a huge amount of material, and will more and more, particularly in comparison to what at least I thought, and I think I can reasonably say that many of us, had that impression too. In any case, yeah, I'm bringing up the rear here. I won't be the last person to speak, but in terms of the fact, my article isn't quite done, but it will be in the next few days. I hope by the end of the weekend it will be up on the site. And I'm writing about, in particular, focusing on the singer and general Yiddish folksmensch Bronya Sakina. As many of you know, I've done a great deal of what in academic terms would be called field work, and what I would also call hanging out and friendship with, in particular, East European born Yiddish traditional performers, both singers and musicians. But one of the people that I spent the most time with and worked with in that sense, and whose repertoire and life history and views of her life and singing, and her views of her life through her repertoire of songs, similar to what Itzik mentioned, was Bronya Sakina, who was part of the Soviet Jewish emigration to the United States, and in fact, only came to the U.S. in 1980. So she, like many Soviet Jewish immigrants of her generation and from smaller locales, particularly in what became the Western USSR, including those areas that were not the USSR until the end of the Second World War, those folks, many of them were kind of virtual, like, time capsules of Yiddish culture, traditional Yiddish culture in many respects. I go into this in the article as to, why that's true, and some of, what we can learn from that. In any case, I'll be taking a look at Bronya's, her life history and context in time, both locationally and culturally, politically, etc. But that's sort of setting the stage. And then, but in particular focusing on one song from her repertoire, the song Golden Zielberg. Golden Zielberg, doch bei jedem Menschen teuer, which we actually, this year at Class Canada, I, together with Sasha Luria, taught the song, and some of you might have been there. And but I'm basically doing an analysis of the song from both a textual and a musical perspective, looking at the narrative of the song. And in general, as it's part of what I've considered a kind of long time approach, and I mean, not only I, but Itzik mentioned it in his when he was talking before too, with the fact that, as I've said for many years, these kind of songs that were particularly, and Zev mentioned it as well, Yiddish folk songs were particularly the province of women, and particularly in a Jewish world and a concept of the East European Jewish world, where we traditionally the text has been thought of as the province of men. Men read texts. Men, read the Tanakh and Talmud, Gemara. There are responsi and so forth. These songs are the texts of women, and they're crafted and recrafted. And as Bronya used to say, she would never say she wrote a song or she just learned a song. She said, "Ich had zunef gestellt a Lied." I put a song together, which describes the entire process of her way of describing the entire process of transmission and shaping the songs, and that the fact that these songs express women's lives and issues, and were not only sung by women, but predominantly this was, a women's genre. And I looked through using some of Bronya's own words and things she said about her songs and her singing. I would look at her worldview and also some of, and how she thought about her songs and singing. And then I maybe offer some reflections about what this has meant for the Yiddish and klezmer scene, and my relationship with her, and some of the songs I've taught over the years, or we originally taught together at Klez Camp back in 1985 and 86, which was, some of you know her, two of her greatest hits are Die Saposhkelach and Ich hab noch as a Borisch nicht gegessen, and Ich hab noch as a Tome nicht gefühlt, which also describes a lot of the pleasure I've felt in working on this all with all of my esteemed colleagues here, and also doing this with many of you over the years. So thank you very much, and TBC. And there'll be video of Bronya singing that song too, and hopefully more eventually as well.
Terrific, terrific. So the third section of the current project takes into account the lived embodiment, the transmission, the aesthetic development of performance, which, as Josh said, that's what drew him into the song, was into the whole world of this, was the extraordinary pleasure that he got from the way people were singing them. So Ethel Raim, who has, so I should say, on this side, I mean, our contributors here, Josh and Michael and Ethel, have done an extraordinary job in kind of seeding this wonderful efflorescence, this growth, this flourishing of many of you who are on screen, doing your own work in the Yiddish folk song, and that's about live transmission. So Ethel has an entire teaching session to show you how she teaches a song, for those of you who haven't been fortunate enough to have that experience live. And we talk a little about the aesthetic. So let me turn it over to Ethel now.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Clara. Thanks, Pete. Thanks to my colleagues. We had wonderful discussions, arguments, and they were incredible. And Josh had to leave, but he talked a little bit about his perspective and Zev's perspective and everything in between for the rest of us. For myself, how to put this? Huh. Without going into much detail, language was not my forte. It took me a while to learn English, whatever. And so for me, communication was really in the quality of voice. And that's what was happening. That's how the communication really took place. And that's what I tuned into. And it's not at all a mystery why I would tune in to the way I have tuned in to traditional style of singing, and that it went more towards traditional singing rather than opera. Less interference with that level of communication. And so my entire life I have been listening and is a huge source of pleasure for me. And as some of you know, I started out really singing Slavic and Balkan music. And when I was first asked to teach Yiddish singing, which was 2010, um, I had to really think through how I would teach this because I never learned it in the way that I studied my Bulgarian or Balkan repertoire, which was to piece words together and piece vocal embellishments together and get the whole phrase. It was a whole other process. And for the Yiddish singing, um, the most helpful thing person actually was Lifshe, Sheikh de Vidman. Um, and I also had the advantage of something called the Amazing Slow Downer. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a way of slowing down a performance of a song or anything where the pitch stays at the same level so that you don't get that weird distortion that used to happen on our, what was the tape recorder, the cassette recorder, and it gave you 20% reduction of speed, and it gave you a 20% reduction of sound. So it's like, der Chosen mir gekauft, das Eige. It would, der Chosen. I mean, it was impossible. It was ridiculous. But so there was the Amazing Slowdowner and Lifshe, and Lifshe's commitment to the song, which is all part of that sense of communication and communication beyond what a person says when they're with you and speaking. It's just another plane, perspective, dimension of communication, and very, very profound. So I figured out how I would teach Yiddish singing. I listened to myself, I listened to Lifshe, and started tuning into the kinds of things that I was listening to when I was studying other styles. And again, I grew up in a time in the 50s. I was already a teenager, and there was wonderful Martha Schlamm and my dearest singing person, Paul Robeson, Mort Friedman. It wasn't the traditional singer. It was another overlay of perspective and artistry that for me was beautiful, but didn't capture the level and sense and communication of traditional singers. And so it was so exciting to finally, in 2010, I think that's when we started Yiddish Song of the Week, Pete, Itzik. It was as early as 2010. And so instead of having to get songs from a book, which gives you dots on a page and lines and text and maybe something about the song or the singer, we had the actual recordings, and that was so thrilling. And so I think that my interest then was in finding a way to pass on, to almost be a bridge, as it were, and pass on the stylistic elements and vocal gestures of the songs. And so that is what I do, and that's what I have done. You'll see with Eleanor Weil, who was very wonderful to do that with me. Eleanor was an apprentice through New York State Council on the Arts, which gives a grant to a teacher and a student to be able to pass the tradition along. And I guess the rest is also in some written form about description of some of the stylistic elements that occur. Yeah, like
And
that.
and you also include, we also include
We
some
have,
of the Lifshitz as well. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
definitely.
So Lifshitz gets a starring role in the profile and in your.
Yes, she does.
And whereas,
Actually, it's Bela
I'm sorry, Bela, yeah, and the family, the Schechter family.
in the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in Josh's contribution to the teaching side, Josh likes to teach in a group rather than individually. And so he has this folk song circle that meets. So there's a clip of Josh's group, and it gives you a different approach to pedagogy and how it, how it can work if it's in a group thing. So we really spotlight this question of transmission. And of course, it's important because they're these teachers now, Michael, Josh, Ethel, are mostly working with people for whom Yiddish is not a native language. And so that's very different than the way you hear a song. So the question is how you transfer an aesthetic and a whole set of decisions about everything that are not obvious to the people you're teaching who didn't grow up with it and aren't just gonna, start at age 6 like Nisha and singing for their elders. So this is the period we're in, and that's really its own fascinating proposition. So I mean, wow, this is extraordinary. It's just like exactly 2 o'clock. I can't believe it. Everybody's been so good, and so we have some time, a little time for some questions that are being monitored by Clara and Pete. So maybe if they've selected any, or if we have any questions, we could those of us who are here have to. Might try to shot at it. Joe Rubin says he has a question. So why don't you just go ahead, Joe, and do the question.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I don't, I can't probably say it any better than I wrote it, but I'm just wondering, as far as like your literature review or whatever you want to call it goes, I missed the first 2 minutes, but I didn't hear the name Sophia Magid mentioned, and she actually wrote a dissertation on Yiddish song in the early Soviet Union, and in this early Soviet period, and I'm wondering where that fits in, and if anybody's gone to St. Petersburg and tried to access more of her files than have.
There isn't a literature review. There's a bibliography, Michael Lukin's bibliography. He gave us permission to give us his bibliography on the Yiddish folk song. Which he published together with Zev Feldman in Oxford online, and Oxford would not let me reproduce that. But Michael Lukin came up with an alternate take he had of it. So that's up there. So there are a few resources like that. There's a little guide that Miriam Chaya Siegel did on online sources for the Yiddish folk song. That's up there. Abby Rabinowitz gave us her bibliography of Yiddish songbooks, which she had published earlier. So we have a gesture towards bibliography, but we do not have a question of source study and what are the sources and who's working on what. That's sort of a different issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I misspoke. I'm thinking of the content of her work, not just the listing.
Well, we're not doing the historical analysis of collectors. I mean, that's that's a whole other ballgame than what we're trying to do, the analysis. Talking about doing analysis, for our teams now. So that's a great website. And yes, Magid obviously needs to be brought out more and discovered, unearthed the way we're celebrating Berdigovsky now everywhere. We need to celebrate her too. Yeah.
Mark, hello. Can I say a word about this?
Yeah.
Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mikhail Lukin he did his dissertation in Hebrew on Yiddish song at the Hebrew University last year. Now, in the Shofar Journal, the next issue of Shofar that I'm editing with Glenn Diener will have an article in English that Michael Lukin has written about the ballad, in which he gives his what he got from Maggid and what his critique of Maggid is.
Great. Excellent.
So I think it'll be a while yet until this comes out, but keep your eyes open for the Shofar where you can read this article about the ballad. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say in addition to Maggid, Jordan Hirsch had earlier asked about where do we posit the work of Ruth Rubin
Right.
In this study?
Well, we all love Ruth and we all proud of her work and some of us knew her, but she was not an analyst. She just simply was not interested in the technical analysis of the Yiddish folk song. She was interested in many other issues. And, in our introduction that Hannah Waletzky and I did to her anthology, we talked about Ruth's approach and what she did and didn't do. But she did not going to go in, was not interested in technical. She was not interested in biographical profiles of the singers. I asked her once, I said, Ruth, you could add a little more about who these people are in your collection. And she said, oh, you academics. So that was her stance about that kind of documentation. So we're going in a different direction here. But of course, all of us acknowledge and love and cherish everything that Ruth did. Yeah.
Well, she gave us the sound.
Yeah.
I mean, that is
Yeah.
huge.
That record, which is, that is still the only anthology from oral tradition of Yiddish folk singers.
That's right.
It's almost 60 years ago, and there is still not another such album.
Songs of the Old Country, Folkways.
And I have my own personal gripe there. When Smithsonian took over Folkways from Moesh, they sent me all the Jewish albums, which are like 75 albums, and said, which one of these should we reissue? And I looked at it, and it was like, this is okay. That's what I said. Oh my God, the one you have to do is the Ruth Rubin, and then they never did it.
Yeah.
So I put it into the anthology. They were a little, they said, oh yes, you can put it in the back of the book. But of course, that was a CD in the back of a book. And that doesn't exist anymore as a format, but now the entire archive is online. So she's finally getting her due.
I would point out, though, that, of course, as many of us know, the Yiddish Song of the Week is essentially an anthology, just in different form. It's not an album, but it's
Absolutely.
of what, in addition to Ruth's collection at the Evo that Lauren and Eleanor Bizunski have made available, etc.
Mark, was that the reissue of vinyl that they asked for a Yiddish album?
Well, they were going to they were going to now put things on CDs. When they took over Smithsonian, it was CDs. When Smithsonian took over, they were going to put things on CDs. And well, actually, it was originally cassettes. You could write to Smithsonian and order it, And then they did reissues of stuff from the collection on CDs.
No, the contract they signed was that everything would be available, which is very important for everyone to know.
Yeah.
So if there's any album that you want, they will make the CD, use the cover art from the LP, and I think you get the stuff online in terms of the booklets.
But I mean, they actually put some of them out in wide circulation and marketed them, and this was not one that they did. Yeah.
Can I ask a question and a comment?
Janet, is that you?
Yeah, that's me. Hi, everyone. Fantastic. Looking forward to this. So exciting, so incredible. So I have a comment on this Ruth Rubin, because you can go on to the Smithsonian website and hear the entire album with I think the liner notes are there too, maybe. I haven't gone on it for some time, but so it is up there. Of course, now you can hear them all on the Ruth Rubin archive from the Evo, which is such a fantastic resource. So I wanted to know if there are any copyright issues around anything on the website. And I guess one thing is question that immediately comes to mind is, let's say you want to make a recording of something that has been put up on the website as an archival resource. Let's say you want to record something of Bronia's or something like that in a commercial recording. I mean, who owns the copyrights to this stuff, if anyone?
I'll leave
Great
this to Pete.
question.
It's his organization, right?
Actually, Michael, you want to take it?
Well, just in the sense of, I mean, in one sense, those of us that made the recordings, if
Yeah.
we're, you know, if we're around,
Mhm.
but that's a kind of, I mean, whether that gets into mechanicals or stuff, um, you know, my approach and to a lot of this is like, you know, is, I mean, Alavai people should be interested in it. Never mind, you know, the copyright. Of course, there are issues of, you know, a certain kind of intellectual property or who you know is able to put this out. But there are sometimes copyright questions. But that it relates more to probably relates more to klezmer music and Hasidic music.
Really. Janet, the Smithsonian has a really wonderful approach to copyright. And it would be good out. I don't know that they've ever put it online, which they actually should. Tony Seeger was very active in doing this. And they really go back to the families of people that sang this music.
Hmm.
And they are the ones that receive royalties
Yeah.
from any real influx of cash. But their policy is wonderful.
Hmm.
And it would be good. Maybe we can actually put that on our site, Mark. You know, if we can get them to, if they've articulated it, we can go
In
ahead
terms
and
of Rick, the only song with there is one of Lifsh's and one of Bronia's. I mean, that's how.
well, there'll be more.
Yeah,
There'll
I
be
mean,
more.
there might be more.
Yeah.
We talked about this briefly, and we already cited Creative Commons. You know that this is somehow an open site. But
Yeah.
whether that gets us in any trouble, I don't know.
Well, I think what Janet was asking about was commercial use of material, but we can move on.
Thanks.
Any other questions or?
I love the comment that Rosa put on, that the audience or the public were the other women that the women were singing for. And Jordan chimed in, absolutely. So I think that that is really important to take note of. You know, when we think of the public, you know, it's the public, you know, but people are listening and learning and communicating. So thank you, Rosa.
And it's very sad that this whole repertoire went by the boards in America. You know, it just had no function here and no marketability. And that's why it's so valuable that it's coming back in this way and that people are, you know, doing it. They just didn't put it on the, you know, on the phonograph records and, you know.
Well, we lost the context for
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
You know, and new contexts were created and things evolve, music evolves as a result. Life
That was
evolves.
somewhat less true with post-war immigrants from Jewish Eastern Europe, like
Mhm.
the
Still had
Gottesmans, and but also as you know, this is where one place where Jews from in and from the former Soviet Union are so important because it did continue to be a functional repertoire in those contexts as well among the same generation.
Well, but much more so at Wise and community centers, and it was not in the home. I mean, with the Schechters, it was in the home, and I think starting in the '60s, you know, Tsunya Raima, all the wonderful singers that Bela would invite, they created that new context, and it wasn't that new. I think that context also was part of the continuity.
Sure.
Some of the older contexts.
Yeah, with Soviet Jews, I mean in home contexts and family contexts.
Sure.
You know.
That's
So
why I think
not only the stuff at community centers.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've recently started collaborating with a musician friend to put on YouTube what we call a song and a poem. And the musician, his name is Vladimir Friedman, sings and plays, but I talk about the context of the song. and the history of the song and the history of the writer where that's appropriate. Um, do you imagine, it seems like it was experimental on our part at this point, but it also makes sense because so many people don't understand Yiddish and might want to know more about songs that are very, very popular, like Auf dem Prippechick, but have no idea, what it says or why one should care. What do you think about that? Anybody?
Well, Mir, are you talking about using kind of the sort of the canon of things we think of as the sort of the chestnuts of Yiddish
Yes, the
song
chestnuts, the
as like sort
chestnuts.
of an entree for people to get into the tradition?
Yeah, like a big event,
Sure,
not the
sure.
Cab Calloway version. No.
Yeah, we've talked about this a bunch with. I'm sure. Sorry, Josh isn't still at the call on the call at Yiddish New York. So we in developing the as Josh was working with Ethel on developing the vocal program at Yiddish New York, we sort of realized that we've sort of missed that, and we added a class by Joanne Bortz, which is going to really get at that, and be about the what we consider a lot of
Yeah.
the chestnuts is a great introduction to the genre because there's some of they're beautiful songs, they're beautiful
And
songs.
I think they're still popular with the ex-Russians who are a bit closer to that. material. Yeah.
I think it's really important to, in this regard, that this tradition we're talking about, where we're presenting, was unlike klezmer and unlike those theater songs, was not learned from recordings. You have to learn it orally. You can't go to these old records and listen to those, Mishna's grandmother, singing. You can only go to what we have of these people and then the transmitters that are doing this today. That is such a big difference between this and the other genres of we think of as the Yiddish tradition that are being preserved. So that's, of course, why we did this section on aesthetic and on transmission, which you wouldn't have to do if you were doing, those other genres the same way. But Sasha has an interesting remark that she finds that in Europe, older Jewish singers do not want to revive some of these repertoires. Do you want to speak to that, Sasha? Are you there?
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have a mouthful of
Something
snacks.
good.
I'm just gonna quickly chew this. I'm sorry. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately from just conversations that I've been having on the internet, because what I'm noticing more and more is that post-Soviet Jews that are either in post-Soviet context or wound up in Israel, which is again a different thing, tend to have a very derogative almost attitude towards traditional and folk song. And no matter how hard you are trying to talk them into looking into that and explaining that you might not know what a deep and intricate culture that is, they tend to have a very much of like, that's an old thing. If we're gonna be developing, we need to write new songs, we need to do new things, we don't need that. And I wonder if kind of like being separated from the source, like being over the ocean in America, made it somehow more unique to America that this tradition in many ways got preserved on that side of the ocean. It's
Well, it
just
didn't get preserved here. I mean, that's what we're talking about. It, it really didn't. So
well, in my experience, it did much more than it did here.
Sasha,
what I'm saying is like all these collections and all these resources were recorded on that side of the ocean, besides, I don't know, Magid and Berigovsky, which is pre-war.
Right.
But I mean, that I would say that had so much to do with the political situation. I mean, it was, the classic thing about, what does a Jewish ethnomusicologist in the Soviet Union work on? Inuit, right? And the but it's a very valid point. I mean, I think one thing it speaks to is the fact that quite a few members, not even of what are now the oldest generation of Soviet and post-Soviet Jewish immigrants, but even people in the middle generations at least, still speak Yiddish or understand enough to appreciate songs in Yiddish. In contrast to the majority of North American Jews. It's a little bit, it reminds me a little bit of the situation with Yiddish and with music in the Hasidic community, in that there is, on the one hand, there are older repertoires that are continued. They're not so much of Yiddish song, but it's a contemporary living culture that continues to produce contemporary Yiddish music. When I say Yiddish music, I mean East European Jewish music in its particular forms.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, you're right, Sasha. We have to factor in the folk revival movement in America, which didn't exist in those countries. It was a late 50s, early 60s, in which Ethel played her part, and so it's that gave Ruth colleagues, to sing with Pete Seeger and to have Moash to turn to as a place to record because of the folk revival. So yeah, that is an American chapter that very indirectly ends up supporting the idea of some traditional Yiddish songs. Yeah.
And demographics.
Yeah.
Right. That. What happened there?
Yeah.
Right. Well, okay, it looks like, yeah, we've gone on probably as long as we're going to today. But urge you all to keep in touch and to suggest things that, might be that this group might want to consider, or, it's now out there among you and as part of the greater team now. And it will be developing. I hope the momentum carries on and we keep developing it from, a fairly simple framework that we've set up here that's available for you now. So thanks again to all the people who have supported this and all the participants for their extraordinary enthusiasm and dedication to the idea of getting this project going. And Pete, do you want to wrap up with any?
I couldn't say it any better than you, Mark.
Okay.
As usual.
How about a song, Ethel?
Yeah, someone want to
Or
sing a
someone.
song?
Ethel, Ethel, Ethel.
Or somebody.
Does anybody want to sing Seid mir gesund or something? I mean,
I can do that one.
Which one should I do?
Seid mir gesund.
Seid mir gesund.
Which one? I'm not, do I know it? I mean, I can the Moisel.
Here's one.
Who here knows Loma Zachala Hein Gesegenen?
Okay.
I Asya Fruman, I think, knows it, right? Sasha Luria, so you sing it. No, Davai. I mean, I can blunder my way through it, but it's not the actual melody. I'd be making it up.
Well, do one you know.
Es ist schon spät, für mach upaheim, für unser Heim, als keiner soll nicht sehen. That's pretty high. Ta-da-da-da-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-da, ta-da-da-da-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-da. Where's the tiger? Ta-da-da-da-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-da, ta-da-da-da-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-da-yum, ta-da-da-da. It's Asya's dai-dai. Jeder Tug-Tug schoi nun, es kreit schon der Huhn, die sind mit der Livone, tanzen schön in Kuhn. Tararai, tararariam, tararai, tararai, tararariam, 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 tarararam, tararariam, tarararararariam, tararai, tararai, tararam, tararariam, 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 tararariam. In seid uns alle gesund. In lassen wir sich sehen, lassen wir sich treffen auf Simchis und auf
Ja.
Webinars und in solche Schmusen. Emily thinks I should show you the moon here, but you'll see it in a while if you can't see it yet. Mil Shem.
Oh, that Scottish moon.
Oh,
That Scottish
Everybody,
moon.
great.
gosh, and Dank, Clara.
Well, at Yiddish New York.
Yes, thank you all. And
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.